My daughter used to joke that I was more committed to the Trans-Canada than I was to anything else in my life. She wasn't entirely wrong. After 31 years driving long haul, most of the stretch between Thunder Bay and Calgary, I'd missed her school play, 2 of her birthdays, and the night my wife finally decided she'd had enough. I never blamed either of them. The road has a way of becoming the only thing that makes sense after a while. You know where you are. You know what's expected of you. Home is the complicated part. I retired from full-time driving about 4 years ago. Bad hip, worse knees, and my doctor in Kenora sitting across from me with a face that said he'd been rehearsing this conversation. I bought a small place just outside of Dryden. Nothing fancy, a 2-bedroom bungalow on a half-acre lot, decent garage, mature spruce along the back fence. I figured I'd finally learn what it was like to stay somewhere, except old habits. I still took contract runs a few times a month, nothing like before, maybe 8-10 days out of 30, but enough to keep the rhythm, enough to remind myself I still could. My daughter in Winnipeg thought I was being stubborn. She was probably right about that too. Because I was gone so often and because the pipes had frozen once 2 winters back, I'd signed on with a local property services company about a year after buying the place. They were called Ridgeline Home Watch. Small operation, 2 guys who covered maybe 40 properties in the region. The idea was simple. They'd check on your house when you were away. Walk the perimeter, look in the windows, make sure nothing had frozen or flooded or caught fire. Twice a week minimum, more if you requested. I paid them through an e-transfer every month, $240. And I thought I was being smart about it. The man who handled my file was named Scott. Mid-40s, wore the same fleece vest every time I saw him, had a company truck with a magnetic logo on the door. When we first set things up, he came over and I walked him through the property. Showed him where the main shutoff was, where I kept the spare key in a lockbox near the side entrance, the code for the alarm system. He seemed thorough, he wrote things down. I felt good about the whole arrangement. For the first 8 months or so, I had no reason to think otherwise. Then my water bill came. I want to explain what that means in a place like Dryden in November. Water bills are not exciting. They're boring and consistent, and mine was always somewhere between $60 and $80 for a 2-month period. I live alone. I don't have a lawn I'm watering in winter. I'm not running a business out of the house. There is no reason, none, for that number to change in any meaningful way. This past November, it was $214. I actually checked it twice, looked at the dates, looked at the address, held it up to the window like that would help. It was my bill. It was my address, and I had been gone for 11 of the past 14 days on a run out to Saskatoon. I called the utility office in town. The woman I spoke to was patient with me. She said the meter reading was accurate, that it had been read manually during the period in question, and that the usage was, in her words, significantly elevated compared to your historical average. She suggested maybe there was a leak somewhere, a running toilet, maybe a dripping tap that had been going while I was away. I told her I'd look into it. When I got home, and I want to be honest about this, I wasn't scared yet. I was annoyed. I went through the whole house checking fixtures, toilets, taps, the utility sink in the basement, the outdoor bibs I'd already winterized. Everything was fine. Nothing was running. Nothing was dripping. The water heater was functioning normally. I even pulled the covers off the inspection ports in the floor because I'd had a slow leak there once before. Nothing. I called a plumber I knew from the hardware store in town. He came out, did a pressure test, checked the supply line. He said everything looked good. He mentioned that sometimes meters can malfunction, said it might be worth a call back to the utility, but he also said something else before he left. He was putting his tools back in his bag and he said, almost like an afterthought, "You been doing any laundry while you were away?" I told him no, I'd been gone. He nodded slowly. Didn't say anything else. But something in the way he nodded stayed with me. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept running through it. There was no leak, there was no malfunction, and I had been gone 11 out of 14 days. The math kept pointing to the same uncomfortable place, and eventually I stopped trying to point it somewhere else. The next morning I drove out to a hardware store in town and bought 2 cameras. Basic wireless units, the kind that connect to your phone and store motion clips to a cloud account. I'd never owned anything like them. I felt a little ridiculous setting them up, honestly, like I was overreacting, like I was going to find out it was a faulty meter after all, and I'd wasted an afternoon. I mounted one facing the side entrance where the lockbox was. The other I put inside, angled toward the main hallway and the door to the basement. Then I left. I had a short run down to Sault Ste. Marie, 3 days, and I told myself if nothing showed up on the cameras, I'd chalk the water bill up to a mystery and get on with things. The first motion alert came at 9:17 on the evening I left. I was at a truck stop outside of Wawa, eating a sandwich in the cab with the radio going. My phone buzzed. I almost didn't look at it. I get alerts for deer sometimes, or when the wind picks up and a branch goes past the sensor, but something made me put the sandwich down. The clip was 11 seconds long. It showed the side entrance. It showed the lockbox being opened, and it showed a man I recognized. A man I had trusted with my home, letting himself in through my side door at 9:17 on a Tuesday evening. It was Scott. I sat there in that parking lot for a long time. The radio was still going. Some country station out of Wawa, a woman singing about leaving somewhere. I remember that very clearly. I didn't move for probably 10 minutes. I just kept replaying those 11 seconds. He didn't look rushed. He didn't look like he was responding to an emergency. He walked in the way you walk into somewhere you've been before. Comfortable. Like it was nothing. I want to be clear about something. My instinct in that moment was to call him directly and ask him what the hell he thought he was doing. I had his number in my phone. I could have pressed it in about 2 seconds. I didn't. And I think that restraint is the only reason any of this ended the way it did. Instead, I pulled up the interior camera. Same clip, same timestamp. The angle caught the hallway and the top of the basement stairs. And there he was, walking down those stairs, not quickly, not with any urgency, just heading down to the lower level of my home like he'd done it 100 times before. Maybe he had. I sat there and thought about that. About how many times I'd been on a run and this man had been walking through my house. And I thought about the water bill, running the laundry, the shower, maybe, making coffee, using the bathroom. 11 out of 14 days, and a water bill that was nearly 3 times what it should have been. He wasn't checking on my property. He was using it. I called my daughter that night. She was up. She keeps late hours, always has, picked that up from me, and when she heard my voice, she knew something was wrong. I told her what I'd found. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said very calmly, "Dad, don't go back there yet. Get more." She's practical like that, level-headed in a way I've never quite managed. She was right. I kept driving. I completed the run to Sault Ste. Marie, turned around, and I watched the camera clips every evening before I went to sleep. He came back on Thursday. He came back on Saturday. Each time, same routine. Side entrance, lockbox, inside basement. The Saturday clip was longer, almost 40 seconds. Long enough to see him carrying something. It looked like a duffel bag. He was bringing things in or taking things out. I couldn't tell. And I think not being able to tell was the thing that scared me the most. When I got back to Dryden, I parked down the road. Not right in front, not in my driveway. I left the truck on a side street and walked up through the neighbor's easement along the back. I stood at the tree line for a while and looked at the house. The lights were off. His truck wasn't there. Everything looked normal. But the side entrance lockbox was sitting slightly open. I hadn't noticed that from the road, but when I got closer I could see the lid wasn't closed flush the way I'd latched it. Like someone had opened it and not bothered to close it properly. I went inside. And I want to describe this carefully, because when you walk into a space that's supposed to be yours and something is wrong, it doesn't always hit you right away. It's subtle. It accumulates. The thermostat was set to 22. I keep it at 18 when I'm away. There was a coffee mug in the dish rack. I'd left no dishes out. The couch had a blanket on it, folded, placed on the armrest in a way that I never would have done. In the basement, and this is the part that really got me, there was a card table set up that I'd had folded in the corner since I moved in. It was set up now, with a folding chair pulled out. There were grocery flyers on it, like someone had been sitting there reading, or sorting mail, or just existing in the space that I'd paid for. I stood at the bottom of those stairs, and I looked at that card table for a long time. There was a Tim Hortons cup on it, still had a little coffee in the bottom, still slightly warm. He'd been there recently. I went back upstairs, locked the door, sat at my kitchen table, and called my daughter. "He's been living here," I said. That's exactly what I said. I know because she repeated it back to me. He's been living there? Not using it, living there. There's a difference. Using something is opportunistic, thoughtless. What I was looking at was deliberate, repeated, comfortable. He'd brought in a folding chair and set up a card table, and he'd sat there in my basement drinking Tim Hortons while I was on the highway, somewhere thinking my house was empty. My daughter told me to call the RCMP and to not touch anything. She said it like someone who'd already thought it through more carefully than I had. I called the detachment in Dryden. The officer I spoke to that evening was someone I'll call Constable Beaumont. Not his real name, but close enough to how I think of him. He was calm, professional, asked the right questions. He asked if I felt I was in immediate danger. I told him no, the man wasn't there. He asked if I had the footage, and I told him yes, I had all of it on my phone. He said he'd like to see it. 2 officers came out to the house that night. They looked at the cameras. They looked at the basement. They took photographs of the card table and the Tim Hortons cup. One of them bagged the cup. The other one wrote everything down. They told me not to contact Scott directly. They said they'd look into it. What I found out over the next few days, partly from the investigation and partly from doing some digging of my own, was this. Scott had lost his apartment in Dryden sometime in the summer. Lease dispute, I was told, details I was never fully given. He'd been effectively without a permanent residence for at least 4 months, and during that time, he had access to a list of properties whose owners were regularly away. Properties with known schedules. Properties with keys he legitimately held for professional purposes. Mine wasn't the only one. I don't know how many others. The RCMP didn't tell me, and honestly I didn't push. What I know is that when they went to speak to him, he didn't deny it. He knew there was nothing to deny. The camera footage was clear. He was charged. Trespassing, break and enter, theft. The duffel bag he'd been carrying on the Saturday clip, I was told, had items from the garage in it. Tools, mostly. A socket set I'd had for 20 years, an old trouble light, a few other things I'd not even noticed were missing because I'd been trying to figure out the water bill. That part made me feel strange, I'll tell you. I'd been so focused on what I could see that I hadn't thought to check what might have quietly walked out the door. There were a few nights after all this in January where I sat in my kitchen with the lights low and I thought about the whole thing. How long it had been going on, how easily I had trusted someone because he wore the right vest and drove the right truck and wrote things down when I was talking. How I'd handed over the alarm code and the lockbox combination and the details of my schedule and never thought to question it. That's the part that's hard to sit with. Not the violation of the space. That's fixable, more or less. New locks, new alarm code, changed the lockbox combo, updated everything. The physical stuff you can fix. What you can't easily fix is the feeling of having been read, of someone having looked at your life, your schedule, your habits, your absence, and decided it was something they could quietly take advantage of. I'm still in the house. I want to say that clearly. I didn't move. I thought about it briefly, but it passed. The house is mine. It didn't do anything wrong. I still have the cameras, both of them, and I added 2 more. One at the back of the garage, one covering the driveway. I've moved the lockbox inside. The key for the side entrance lives on my keychain now, which means when I need someone to have access, I have to give them a key directly and get it back directly. More effort, but the kind of effort I should have been making from the beginning. The property watch service is gone, obviously. I did one more run after all of this settled down. February out to Regina and back. About 10 days total. First night away, I kept checking the camera apps on my phone every hour or so, like I was expecting something. Everything was fine. The motion alerts were a branch moving, a deer at the tree line, a neighbor's dog that I could see on the edge of the frame. But old habits take time to quiet down. My daughter came out to visit in March. Spent a long weekend. We went to the farmer's market in town, watched a hockey game on TV, ate too much. Before she left, she walked around the house with me and we checked every camera together, made sure the angles were right, made sure the coverage didn't leave any blind spots. She said, "You should have told me sooner." She wasn't wrong. I should have called her the moment the water bill didn't make sense. Instead, I'd tried to logic my way through it, the way I've always tried to logic my way through things that make me uncomfortable. Check the fixtures. Call the plumber. Run through the explanations until I found one that let me go back to sleep. The road teaches you a certain kind of self-sufficiency that can turn into a liability if you're not careful. You stop asking for help because you've stopped needing it for so long. You trust your own ability to assess a situation and handle it alone. That's fine when the situation is a blown tire outside of Nipigon. It's not as useful when the situation is that someone has been living in your basement. If this has happened to you, and from what I've read since, it's not as uncommon as you'd think, especially for people who travel regularly. A few things I'd say clearly. Document everything before you touch anything. Do not confront the person, not because you shouldn't be angry, but because you don't know what you're walking into, and anger without evidence is just noise. Get the cameras in while you still don't know what you'll find. And trust the instinct when something doesn't add up. The water bill didn't add up. I knew it didn't add up. I spent 2 weeks talking myself out of what I already knew. I also want to say this. Report it to the police. I know some people would rather just handle it themselves, change the locks, pretend it didn't happen. I understand that impulse. But this man had access to other properties, other people's homes, other people who were trusting the same service I was trusting. Keeping that to yourself doesn't protect you. It just means the next person doesn't get a warning. The plumber who came to my house, the one who did the pressure test and said everything looked good, I ran into him at the co-op in February. He asked me how things had turned out. I told him. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, I had a feeling. I asked him why he hadn't said anything. He said, you had that look, like you already knew and you weren't quite ready. He was right. I wasn't quite ready, but I got there. And the cameras helped me get there in time for it to matter. If you're away from your home regularly, whether you're driving, working out of town, traveling, caring for family somewhere else, do yourself a favor. Assume nothing. Verify everything. The people who are supposed to be protecting your property are strangers with legitimate access, and most of them are exactly what they present themselves to be. But some of them are not. And the only thing standing between those two categories, in my experience, is paying attention. Take care of yourself out there, and take care of what's yours.